At this time, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, and that is Dr. Gale Ridge. Gale is an entomologist with the Connecticut Agriculture Experiment Station, and Dr. Ridge wears many hats overseeing the insect inquiry office that fields questions from the public. She has done extensive research on bed bugs, but our topic for today is the invasive jumping worm. So thank you, Gale. You can take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I'm an entomologist, and here I am talking about jumping worms. It's part of my job. I manage the Insect Information Office at the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station in New Haven, Connecticut. And about 2.5 years ago, we were swamped by inquiries with jumping worms. And so I felt like there was a deficit, a drought of information. And so I reached out to the research scientists, and I have been working with them not as a researcher, but as a disseminator of information about these worms. And so the information I'm giving you to you today at record speed, because it's a short presentation, is what the scientists have found. I would like to give credit to a number of the slides. They're not mine, but why reinvent the wheel? And so a number of these slides were put together by Joseph Gouras, a research scientist at the University of Vermont, and Mary Nuri Ain, who is also one of his graduate students who's just got her doctorate. So jumping worms, this is a contentious subject, and they are causing a lot of mischief in the Northeast. What do they look like? These are very muscular worms, and as adults, they can be 6 to 8 inches in length. They have a high hydrostatic body content, so they're very stiff, and they thrash when you pick them up. They whip around, and so they have numerous names like crazy snake worms, and they certainly feel like snakes when you're handling them. They are bicolored. On the dorsal surface, they are dark, and on the ventral surface, they are lighter colored. You can see this in this particular image. This is the dorsal surface, and this is the ventral surface of these two worms. They are basically worms on steroids, and they basically homogenize the organic layer of the soil. They're very close to the surface, so the first top 4 inches can be literally changed, and you can see them sitting on the changed soil. It looks like coffee grains or grape nuts in a constitution. Is basically everything that's on the top layer of the soil going through the guts and coming out as this sort of granular material. These castings are extremely protective. They're like a blanket, and they protect the younger worms that hatch out in the spring from sudden cold, or in fact fire. So you can actually have a fire go over the top of this soil, and the insects worms are protected. Okay, how did they come to the United States? First records show that they were actually introduced in the United States to feed Australian platypuses at the Bronx Zoo. But they have also been introduced through nursery material from the Far East. There are 3 species currently in the United States: the large jumping worm, Metaphia hilgendorfi, the rustic jumping worm, Amanthus agrestis, which is the one that's most common that we're seeing in this particular area, and the compact jumping worm, the Amanthus tokiensis. We're noticing that when they cohabitate, they actually assist each other in survival, and so it doubles the concern. Their biology is out of the normal for earthworm biology. We have around 17 species of earthworms in North America. They're mostly from Europe. They're introduced by colonialists, a couple of 100 years ago. Earthworms are not native to North America. When we had the last glacial period, They were basically wiped out except for a few Native American earthworm species, and they're further south. The European earthworms generally live for more than 1 year, 2, 3, 4 years. This particular Asian jumping worm group only lived for 1 year. So they've developed some very effective strategies for surviving stressful climate situations such as winter. All right, so these worms only live a year. So this is the basic biology of them. You have the adults. The adults are active in from late July through to October, and the females will slough off their clitellum. The clitellum is I'll back up, is the collar that you see around the girth of the Asian jumping worm. It actually encircles the body, whereas if the European jumping earthworms, it's like a saddle. It doesn't encircle. It is also completely smooth, but this is the reproductive structure that the females use. And in it, they will produce cocoons. It will then slide off the worm and into the soil, and each clitellum segment that's slid off will house a couple of cocoons, and in those cocoons will be eggs. Okay, if everything goes well, you will get the youngsters hatching in April, late April into early June as hatchlings. They don't have a clitellum, so you can't tell them. You can't tell whether you have jumping worms or not. And then they will progress into adults and reproductive females. There are very, very few males. Most of the reproduction is done parthenogenically. The cocoons are a very effective mechanism of survival. They will actually dehydrate during the winter to protect the embryos. Also during periods of drought, they will also dehydrate. The cocoons will not all hatch the following spring. Some will delay and will hatch the year after or the year after that. It's a mechanism of banking these worms, so that if there is an attack or a high mortality in the following year, you've still got a few cocoons tucked away as insurance policy. We are facing a real issue with these worms because we lie on the 40th parallel. Our East Coast ecosystem is a giant version of the Japanese and East Asian maritime climate which they come from. So they have been released into basically worm heaven as far as they're concerned. And you can see in this map here, which Joseph Gore has prepared, the dark gray area is the potential area where these worms will spread. These are the sightings, and they're actually now up in New Brunswick, Canada. They're having no trouble getting around this region of the country. This is what they will do to a forest ecosystem. This is again photographs given to me by Joseph. On the left is Camel Hump Park, that's in Vermont. And this is where no jumping worms are. You can see verdant undergrowth. And things are looking good. But then on the right side, you can see what happens when the jumping worms get going. The combination of jumping worms and deer browse basically wipe out forest floor plants. And so they are threatening future tree growth, such as the maples, because when these trees are young, they're shallow rooted, and these worms do a lot of disturbance in that organic layer and prevent germination and development of young plants and native plants. How and why did jumping worm populations suddenly jump? And it seems to have happened after 2013. It's Hurricane Sandy that caused it to happen in the New York, Connecticut area. New York, surprisingly, New York City, the inner burbs of New York City, is surprisingly, there's about 40% of the landmass actually are parks and open space tucked in between the buildings. And so, you know, jumping worms were there, but they couldn't go anywhere, and people weren't doing much exchange or movement of organic material in those areas. So they're very, very confined. But when Hurricane Sandy hit the New York area, something like 15,000 trees were dropped by the storm. So consequently, they were cleared and mulched. And then the mulch was then sold and distributed around our region. And guess what? The jumping worms were in that mulch. And so that's why following 2013, did we see a great deal of distribution of this worm in this region. Okay, and so yes, they are spread by mulch and compost. They're also spread in footwear with deep cleats, like hiking boots or working boots, and people are not cleaning the cleats after working at a site and then moving to another site. So the cocoons would be in that dirt that's in the cleats of the boots. This is how white nose got spread from New York to Connecticut with the bat populations. It was actually through scientists who accidentally, well, didn't realize that when they visited the cave systems in New York, they picked up the fungus that then they walked back to Connecticut in with their boots. Rooted plants in soil is another big transfer. So, you know, garden club exchanges, nurseries, any movement of plants in pots. Vehicle tire treads, such as construction equipment, or moving equipment, can cause, you know, promote movement of the worms if there's soil entrapment in the treads. Yard waste, waterways particularly. Jumping worms will gravitate towards waterways, water courses, particularly if there's drought as an area of protection, and so they will move along those waterways. Boat launches are hotspots because of fishermen dumping their bait. And sometimes jumping worms are in that bait after they've done some fishing. And then self-distribution. These things can move around by themselves. So this is human management and wild management. The big issue with management of these worms is preventative introduction at this point until the scientists can find a mechanism to be able to control them. And they're on the hunt, and they have got some promising candidates to manage jumping worms. But currently at this point, things that citizens can do is if you're buying compost or mulch, solarize it before you put it onto the ground. So basically what you should do is buy large sheets of painter's plastic. Lay a sheet out on your driveway in the hot weather. Put the mulch that you bought on top of that plastic sheet. Flatten it out to about 4 inches in depth, but don't go to the edge of the sheet. Leave about a 9-inch band around the outside of plastic. Then get a second plastic sheet, put it over the top as a cover, and then fold the edges of the lower sheet over the top of the upper sheet and duct tape the two. This completely traps the worms, so they won't flee. So as the temperatures increase in that solarization process, they get killed. At 105 degrees, all stages, cocoons, eggs, immatures, and the adults will die. So it's a relatively low temperature, but it's a good idea to allow about 3 days, let it sit in the sun for about 3 days. And then you can then be comfortable that your compost or mulch that you've introduced to the property is clear of jumping worms. When you buy plants, bare root plant. Garden clubs should, when they're buying and selling plants, should try and buy and sell plants bare root. Try not to have potted plants or soil. Soil is the issue here. Don't fish using jumping worms. A lot of containers that fishermen buy will have a mixture of worms in there, and sometimes you have a jumping worm. Also, don't move dead wood. They've been found under bark that's dried or pulled up, tucked away. So if you're moving dead wood from one area to another, you could be accidentally introducing jumping worms. And then keeping all your cultivation activities in-house. You know, make your own mulch, make your own compost. As one example, the Thane Family Reserve, which is a property next to the Bronx Zoo, does not have jumping worms because they have kept all their activities, mulching, plant development, growth, everything in-house. And so they do not have jumping worms, whereas in other places very close to them, including Bronx Zoo, have jumping worms. So it's a good example. Keep everything in-house. Currently, there are no biological or chemical compounds currently registered, and that's extremely important to take note of, for the treatment of jumping worms. Yes, there is an organic fertilizer which has been used in golf courses for putting greens, that has been used and will kill earthworms. But those are the European earthworms. We have to be very specific. This is a completely different animal. This is the Asian jumping worms. So, you know, in labeling, you have to be very careful. So at this time, there is nothing that's on the market labeled to treat for Asian jumping worms. The best thing you can do at this time is to irritate them, ruffle up the soil with your fingertips or you know, a small trowel or tool, and wear gloves if you feel uncomfortable, and grab the fleeing adults. Adults are out at this time and they will rise to the surface and run, and they're very fast moving. Pick them up, put them in a bucket, a shallow bucket of soapy water, and drown them. Then drain the water and then put them into a plastic bag and then throw them in the trash. Do not pull them back into the onto the property after you've killed them, because the clitellum that those females have may have cocoons in them, and those cocoons would survive a drowning process for the worm itself. We are experiencing a very interesting development, and I'm getting a lot of calls now regarding the hammerhead worm. This is a land planarian. Planarians are flat worms. In fact, you can chop them up into lots of pieces and you'll have lots of different worms flying out. They're very good at surviving attack. There's about 200 species in North America, and this one is actually an introduction from the Orient, from Asia, China, Japan and Eastern China. It's a native there, and it evolved with the Asian jumping worm. It had been introduced by accident to North America many decades ago. Populations remained very low. In fact, I would get one call every couple of years. Now the calls have been picking up because its prey is now establishing in North America, and they're doing very well by it. These are extraordinarily fast-moving worms, and what they will do, because their prey is fast-moving, will very quickly wrap themselves around the jumping worms, give it a little shot of venom, quote unquote, to sedate it, and then kill it. And they're very good at it. And so we're getting a prey-predator cycle where the prey numbers are coming up, but the predators' numbers are tracking up after it. So my calls now, I've had 4 calls since the beginning of the month of these worms being seen on people's driveways. So if you see them, don't kill them. Let them go about their business, because they're very efficient killers of Asian jumping worms. Other wild management issues that are beginning to develop is the pearl parasite. It's a gregarian protist that's getting into them. There are funguses like Bovaria bassinia and Metarhizium bruneum that will kill them. Salamanders, toads, snakes, rats, moles, raccoons, and even the American robins when they're young. Most of the jumping worms are pretty nutritious when they're young, but when they get bigger, for instance, with the salamanders, they're too big to kill. So the other thing is in the garden, you can use a rototiller in May and June. You can chop up the younger worms. When they get chopped up, they actually do die. So that is sort of kind of the very brief sweep of what's going on with the Asian jumping worm. Any shallow-rooted plants in your yard are likely to be severely harmed by their activity. So look for deep-rooted plants that thrive. So think of about a prairie garden. They require, they evolve for deep roots because of the environment out in the Midwest and the far west. So, you know, things like milkweed, black-eyed Susan, blue star, goldenrod, Joe, pie weed, purple coneflower, anything that's deep-rooted does much better when there are jumping worms around. I also, because of my connection with the research scientists, the arrangement is that I have a living fact sheet, and it's called Jumping Worms in Connecticut. You can easily Google it. I just revised it, having talked to the research scientists on the 28th of September. So it's as up to date as you can possibly get it. And I will continue to update it as we progress through finding out ways of controlling these worms. So I think that's about it. I think we can go on to questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Gale. There are a lot of questions that came in. I'm going to start at the top. We only have about another minute or so before we have to transit. So
absolutely.
The first question was, won't the solarization of the soil kill beneficial microbes and insects as well?
Yes, it will. But once the soil or compost is put into the ground, it will be repopulated.
Okay.
So it's not been an issue.
Another question was about, instead of putting them in a container with soapy water, what about using boiling water? Will that kill all the stages as well?
Absolutely. No question. They can't survive that kind of temperature.
Okay.
I have no idea what they look like when they come out after being boiled, but probably a little stiff.
And then, so one more question, but I think you did answer this in your presentation. The person had just solarized 100 pounds of compost that had many adult jumping worms. Do the worms need to be removed, or is it safe to assume that all stages are killed?
If they've kept the temperature above 105, you can always have a thermometer in there to check for, up to 3 days. Everything will be dead.
Excellent.
Including the cocoons within those dead females.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. I think if you want to answer any other questions in the chat, you can feel free. I did share the link to your resource, which I believe a lot of people will find very helpful. So thank you very much. At this time, we are going to transition to our IPM Minute. And today I will be presenting that content. So for our IPM Minute today, we're talking about gutters, and it's the time of year when we're thinking about cleaning our gutters, but I wanted to identify the reasons for why this affects pest populations and why it's an important thing to consider. So the important role of gutters is to move water away from the home. It can prevent splashing that will affect the foundation of the home, erosion that can pull soil and other substrates around from the foundation. If gutters are functioning properly, they can prevent structural damage, including the addition of moisture to the foundation, and reduce attractiveness to pests. So from spring to fall, if we do not eliminate leaves that are in our gutters, some of the pest issues that can arise are mosquitoes. Water that is standing in gutters over time can be attractive to ovipositing female mosquitoes. They will lay their eggs in that and actually breed right in the gutters overhead of your house. Those mosquitoes will not travel far for a food source, so they will be feeding on people that are living in that home. Similarly, no-see-ums are another type of biting insect that will feed on blood. They're very tiny. They will also breed in standing water that is associated with gutters. Springtails and spiders will live in this moist environment as well. In addition to the gutters themselves, if water is splashing out and landing at the foundation level, there could be pooling water here that can be attractive for those same critters. So mosquitoes, no-see-ums, spiders and springtails. But also this environment is attractive for a number of other arthropods, including centipedes, millipedes, and a variety of what we consider occasional invaders that will try to get into the home if conditions outside are less than conducive. We also want to think about water that can potentially get inside the home if the gutters are not functioning properly, and damage to the foundation, as you can see here. In the wintertime, if gutters are not functioning properly, one thing that can happen is that water will accumulate and then freeze, causing ice dams. This can lead to water damage that you see on the top right image, where water has infiltrated part of the attic structure. And in the springtime, this can lead to conditions that promote carpenter ants. So that moisture-damaged wood is attractive. The carpenter ants will chew into that wood to build their nests or their satellite nests, and you can have issues with structural pests. Some additional concerns are if you are capturing water from gutters to ensure that your tanks are also not contributing to pest problems. So you want to make sure that the screen is clear and functioning so that mosquitoes cannot get into these systems, and also that the water overflow is not creating some of the splashing and pooling described previously. When we're considering cleaning our gutters this time of year, just a few things to keep in mind. So ladder safety, we want to make sure that ladders are used properly and that they don't slide along the gutter, which is a smooth surface. Electrical safety, if there are electrical lines that are attached to the home. And then there's always a concern of stinging insects potentially have nesting along that same area of the gutter where we're looking to clean. And finally, just in terms of how we can go about cleaning gutters, we can use a bucket with a painter's hook attached to a ladder to drop that material into the bucket so that we can dispose of it properly. There are leaf blower attachments that can be used to blow leaves out of the gutters, and then of course gutter guards, but these need to be maintained in order to prevent any accumulation of material on top of them. So that's it for our IPM Minute today. We're at our time of 12:30. I want to thank everybody for your attendance and for our great presentations from Dr. Gale Ridge. If you do have questions, you can submit them now, and we will post those answers in the description of the YouTube video. So thank you very much for your attendance, and have a great weekend.